thank you for joining us for 2018 elections. We're going to be talking to some candidates, and they're not in here just because of the political piece. They're running because they care. Right now, Oregon, Portland, metro area is growing. You could go to the west side, you can go to the east side, you go to the north side, south side, and cranes are everywhere. We're building, we're growing. But the question is asked by the citizens, where are we going from this point? A lot of new changes have been made. We have a new governor, we have a new mayor, we have a new police chief, and we also have a new Supreme Court justice. But the questions from the citizens is still the same. Where do we go from here? These candidates are going to tell you where they plan on taking you. The rules of the platform. You probably know them because you've been traveling together. We're going to get it out there. Each candidate will have 1 to 2 minutes to address the audience. After that, we'll have questions. Then you have 1 to 2 minutes to close. If a candidate mentions another candidate's name, that candidate will have an opportunity for 30 seconds to respond. I will be timing for the sake of equity and time, and we just have an interesting time, and let's get started. We'll start with you, Ms. Julie.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer McGuirk.
Jennifer, I'm sorry. I said Julie, Miss Jennifer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer McGuirk, and I'm running for Multnomah County Auditor. I'm running because I want to continue our office's approach to promoting accountable and transparent government, while also bringing a new approach that promotes equity and community engagement in the auditor's work. The county's focus is on health, social services, and public safety. And that's why I think as auditor, I should prioritize auditing programs that directly affect people's health and safety. Let me give you an example of what I want to audit. In 2015, an audit was done by the Sheriff's Office that found disproportionate use of force against people of color in our jails. Disability Rights Oregon also came out with a report detailing deplorable conditions in our jails for people with mental health issues. In one case, a man pulled out one of his own teeth. He'd been in isolation without access to health care. How do we prevent these things from happening? And going further, how do we care for the most vulnerable in our community? I think we have to stand up for them. Auditing is one way that I stand up, and I hope you'll decide this May that one way you'll stand up is by voting for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Scott Lauren. I'm also running for Multnomah County Auditor, and I'm running for 3 reasons. Number one, I'm a state auditor right now, and I've learned the power of performance audits to really improve services in government, and particularly services for the most vulnerable people among us. So let me give you a couple examples of audits I've worked on. Most recently, I've worked on an audit of the foster care system. We found really inadequate management in that system. We found incredibly high caseloads that were really stressing out caseworkers and affecting their ability to deal with foster children and their parents. So we issued a very strong report on that, and now we're getting results from that report. I've also focused on children in alternative education and online education programs who are at risk of dropping out, and found that those children were really off the state's radar screen. Again, issued a report on that, very strong findings. It's making a difference, changes are happening. And done an audit on the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program and the difficulty that the caseworkers were having providing support services to the people in that program, mental health care, physical health care, job training. So we pointed that out very strongly in a report, and that really has helped turn that around. Second reason is the county has not really focused on services that for vulnerable people or services that matter most in the last 10 years. So I want to try to change that trajectory. And third and final reason is that I have a background that I think will help me a lot. I was a financial auditor and at that time a CPA. Then I was a reporter for 23 years, including 17 at the Oregonian, so I really got to know this community quite well and care about it a lot. And for the last 5 years, I've been a state auditor. So I'm endorsed by 4 former county auditors, Governor Barbara Roberts and former County Chair Bev Stein. And they have a lot of faith in me to do this job, do it well, and really concentrate on the services that matter most. So that's why I'm in the race.
Thank you, Scott. Mr. Mark?
My name is Mark Jolanowitz, and I'm running for Multnomah County Auditor. This evening I want to talk about why I'm the best choice to lead the Multnomah County Auditor's office. I know performance auditing. I spent 12 years at the U.S. General Accounting Office, the agency that literally wrote the rules for government performance auditors. While at GAO, I audited U.S. programs in 8 countries. I worked on high-profile audits of financial institutions like Fannie Mae and the Farm Credit System. And I led audits of multi-billion-dollar programs in Medicare and Medicaid. I know Multnomah County, its people, its programs, and its culture. In 17 years at Multnomah County, I've audited in every department in the organization, from IT to mental health care. I'll draw on this experience in pursuing audits that matter. For example, taking advantage of my years of healthcare auditing experience, I'll identify strategies for helping address racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare outcomes. I'll work hard on disparities in the criminal justice system, not only the coordination, the condition in the jails, but also with the sheriff's expanded role in enforcement in East County. I'll continue to work on county human service programs to pinpoint solutions to protect the county's most vulnerable clients in residential settings. And as your advocate for accountability, I'll also be looking at high-dollar projects like capital construction and IT. I know there's a lot more to good auditing than just finding problems. A good auditor has to be able to develop solutions and then work with county elected officials and other managers in getting these solutions implemented. I have the background and I've developed the relationships to get this done.
Thank you. The first question, we'll start with Ms. Jennifer. Each one of you talked about the mental health issue. Let's discuss a little bit about that. What are your plans to address the mental health issue?
Well, as I mentioned, I want to look at conditions in our jails. The chair and sheriff have both said we need to make improvements, and they committed to doing that. So I want us to find out what have they actually done, what have they changed. But going further, I think we also need to see what access is like to other services that people who are homeless and dealing with mental illness are trying to access. I think we need to look at the services we're providing in different clinical settings and so forth and make sure that they're being effective. In many ways, the county is seen as a national leader for a lot of our programs like reducing opioid misuse and doing care for people in the communities where they live. I think we need to look at those best practices and see if there are ways we can expand that.
Mr. Scott, thank you for your comment. Mr. Scott.
Thank you. So mental health care is one of those areas that the county auditor's office hasn't looked at in the last 10 years. So there's a lot of potential for auditing that makes a difference in that area. One of the first ones I'd like to do out of the gate is to look at mental health care in schools. We just did an audit, like I said, of alternative education, and we also had auditors in doing a graduation rate audit. So we talked with people at schools all across the state and in Multnomah County as well. And what we found, every school told us that one of their biggest issues was just having a deficit of mental health care for their kids and behavioral health care that really would help them out. The county has programs to deal with that, but I'm told by teachers in the districts around the county that there's still waiting lists and there's still a shortage of services to be provided. So I'd like to take a deep look at that and just make it really transparent to the public what the situation is, how much of a deficit do we have, what can we do about it.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Mark?
I've worked on several audits of mental health care, including one that was done more recently than 10 years ago. The county has the largest Medicaid mental health insurance company in the state, with about 160,000 covered lives. I did a lot of work on identifying risks in that system and the extent to which our ability to contract with our mental health providers was effective. I was instrumental in dealing with the situation when Cascadia went bankrupt. I helped to administer the contract of the forensic auditor during that time, and was part of oversight of looking to see how individual clients were distributed to other providers in the area. I'm most interested in mental health to the extent that it is or is not coordinated with physical health care. Multnomah County is the largest provider of health care services in the Medicaid population, but we don't provide mental health care services outside of what's available in the school-based clinics. I'd like to see, to the extent to which our physical health and mental health are able to share information in order to coordinate care, and that's one of the first things I want to look at.
Thank you for your comment. The next question is, and each one of you have 2 minutes. Let's talk about police reform. You mentioned about you doing some auditing on that. Let's address that a little bit. We'll start with Mr. Scott. Mm-hmm. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Police reform. So the police are under the city of Portland, but the county has the sheriff's office, which does patrols, as Mark mentioned, in East County. I'd like to broaden it out a little bit and talk about the whole criminal justice system. The county has the biggest piece of the criminal justice system, bigger than the city of Portland. It has the district attorney's office, it has the sheriff's, which runs the jails and has its patrols. It also has the Office of Community Justice, which does probation and parole. So I think in every point that is touched upon by the criminal justice system in the county, there's inequities in the delivery of that service. There's inequities in how bail is, who gets out on bail, who gets arrested, who gets stopped, who gets charged, how long the sentencing is, all those inequities all up and down the line. And the county's doing a lot to try to address that, but I think there's a big role for the auditor's office to step in, try to look at that data, which has been a little bit controversial, see how accurate it is, see where the biggest inequities are, and really focus on those areas. Look at some other counties and see what they've done to try to reduce those, see what the most successful practices are, and judge Multnomah County's practices in light of that. Try to see if there's more that Multnomah County can do to try to reduce those inequities in the system.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Mark, you have 2 minutes, sir.
The issue of policing and the interrelationship between the Portland Police and the county sheriff and the DA is pretty complicated. We had a really good study by the MacArthur Foundation looking at disparities in the different ways in which people are treated once they enter that system. The question of how people get into the system is something that is a little bit harder for the Multnomah County Auditor to reach. I think that we have the potential to learn an awful lot by looking at the way that the sheriff works in East County. The sheriff has, in the last few years, added the police function of the city of Troutdale and the city of Fairview. And with the sheriff, that's a place where we have an opportunity to see all the data involved in the system. So the circumstances around an arrest, what happened at booking, what happened with the DA. And I think that we can learn an awful lot from that. From there, it would be about looking to possibly do something in coordination with the City of Portland Auditor to address the larger piece about the police interaction with the county.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Scott, I saw you nodding. Did you want to chime in on that?
Oh, no.
Yes.
It's interesting what Mark had to say.
Okay. The next issue is dealing with the racial.
I'm
sorry, Ms. Jennifer. I apologize. You have 2 minutes.
Thank
you.
So I think we definitely need to coordinate with the city auditor, and I've talked with her about coordinating on some other projects. So I think there's opportunity for collaboration there. I think we need to really look at the institutionalized racism within our justice system and be honest about it. You know, with Oregon's racist history, we can't not talk about that openly. So I think that's really critical, and I think the auditor, because we deal in facts, can help shine a light on that and why we still have inequities. I think the local Public Safety Coordinating Council, which is chaired by the mayor of Portland and the county chair, and is kind of the steward of much of that public data, is a great place to start looking and obtain access to that data. We all have a very close colleague who did that study I talked about in the sheriff's office and was then fired, and then shared public data from the local Public Safety Coordinating Council and then was fired. It really demonstrates that you need to have an independent voice. You need to have the auditor looking at those issues and being willing to stand up and be firm and say, there's a lot of great things you're doing to try to change the system. Here's where you're still falling short. And so I want to do that throughout the whole thing. Pre-booking, who's being pulled over. I think the great gang enforcement audit that just came out of the City of Portland office was fabulous. I want to do things like that for the county in collaboration with all the jurisdictions in our county.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have a question? Feel free if you have a question to go to the microphone. Okay, we have a question. Please limit your questions to 1 minute so the candidates have the proper time to respond.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Professor Hall, and I would first like to salute each one of you for running for office. My grandfather would always say the next closest thing to God is an auditor, and we all trust you all. We all trust you all and put our trust in you. So I just want to salute you all. And having ran for office twice for Multnomah County in '98 and 2014, before I worked for a college, I worked for Multnomah County about 18 years ago. I've seen up close the importance of having someone come in and have an independent eye. With that said, I've got two fundamental questions. The first question has to do with a person, a researcher that was fired for doing her job. And what I thought was interesting as a public advocate was that the way she was branded as a lone wolf person that had no consent to disclose the information by administrators. And as opposed to taking a position and allowing that to be a release of information in terms of their opinion from the director of communication, these administrators felt it was necessary to brand this
Sir, I have to
person.
ask you to ask your question.
So my question has to do with would you support an ombudsman's office with 4 staff or so in the auditor's office that budget would not come from your general budget, and as a way for county employees to file a complaint? Secondly, would you support the model from the late Chair McCoy, which is the Merit Council that allowed management to file complaints? Would you support both of those offices located in your office as a way to address the unjust treatment of people who dissent against corrupt practices or are under attack for other reasons?
Thank you for your question. We'll start with Mr. Mark first, and we'll go Mr. Scott, and then Ms. Jennifer.
Okay.
No, excuse me, Ms. Jennifer, Mr. Scott, and then Ms. Mark.
So I'm
You're first
Okay.
this time, because I started at the other end.
Okay. Yes, I support an ombudsman. I actually am proposing to, I currently work in the office, and so if I'm elected, instead of replacing my position, I'll hire an organizational ombudsman to provide a confidential resource for employees at any level of the organization to come if they're facing an issue that perhaps if they're a union represented, they're not ready to do a formal grievance yet, they want some counsel. If they're not represented, they can come and get guidance and advice. Organizational ombudsman's roles are really to help the person say, this is what I want my ideal outcome to look like, and help them think through that process. Would it involve mediation? Would it involve potentially even leaving the county? Would it involve providing education of some kind to others involved in this situation? So it can be a whole range of things. The Merit Council, to me, that's a separate issue because I feel like an organizational ombudsman can provide that confidential role for anybody at any level. I think the Merit Council is really important. It hasn't been used. So I think there's clearly a way the auditor can remind people it exists or that it should exist and help people find ways to access it.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Scott.
I'm intrigued by the organizational ombudsman idea too. I don't want to give up an auditor position for it, so I would like it to be in addition to instead of a replacement for. I think the auditor positions are just too important. I want to, if I am elected, one of the first things I want to do is kind of audit myself the auditor's hotline, which is another outlet for potential complaints. I don't think it's operating as effectively as it could now. I'd like to look at other county offices and local government offices, city offices, and see what they're doing with their hotline, see what they're doing with things like organizational ombudsman, talk to people about how it's working, what the pitfalls are, where it falls short, and really do kind of a deep dive, just like we would do in an audit, of what are the best practices here, how could we set this up so it would work most effectively. I just also want to, part of your question was asking about Amanda Lamb, who was the person who was fired when that data came out. This was a leadership decision of the county auditor's office. This was nothing to do with Jennifer or Mark, but I think it was really bad that the county auditor didn't go in right in that situation and say, what's up, what is the data, what's accurate, why was this person fired for releasing data, what's your plan for transparency of this data, all that sort of thing.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Mark, and then Ms. Jennifer would like to respond to that. You have 1 minute, sir. Actually, I'm going to give you a minute and a half because he gave you a twofold question.
Right.
Fair enough?
Fair
Sure.
enough.
Because I gave you two. Okay.
Terrific. I'm really interested in the ombudsman position as well, provided that the budget comes in addition to the auditor's budget. I think that having more resources at our disposal is always a good thing. And for a variety of reasons, employees have not felt comfortable coming to HR, which is where they traditionally would go. So I am definitely in favor of that. I think that something like that could serve management as well, because something that auditors and everyone in the county is acutely aware of is we just don't have resources, and that by expanding anything, you are necessarily taking something away from other deserving programs. So I'd want to be really careful about that.
Thank you for your comment. Ms. Jennifer had a response.
Yes, I want to just provide a little more information. I've been doing a lot of research into the organizational ombudsman role. I know a lot about how it's supposed to function. I know a lot about the leading practices set out by the International Ombudsman Association for how you're supposed to set it up. So this wasn't something I came up with on a whim. We have actually done a lot of work already looking at our hotline and how it compares to other hotlines around the country and other auditor offices and similar. And where we're really lacking is we don't publicize it. We started getting a lot more calls. Now that's not to say it's perfect, but I don't necessarily think that an audit is needed of the hotline. We've kind of already been doing that over the last couple of years. Now lastly, the reason I'm willing to give up a position to fund that is because our employees need it so badly. That's not to say I won't push for more funding, but there are other drastic, vital needs in our county. And I feel like we can step up the volume of work that our auditors are doing so that we won't be giving something up by adding this vital resource.
Thank you for your response. In all fairness, either one of the candidates have a response to a remark, additional remark?
Yeah,
Okay,
I appreciate the work that's been done already. I find the hotline interface kind of confusing. I think there could be a lot more clarity in what employees could expect if they make a hotline call. So I think there's more work to be done.
Okay, thank you for your response. Okay, the next question, we addressed it a little bit, but we're going to go back and address it a little bit more. It was dealing with the racial inequity. So let's address that a little bit. And what was your plans to address that issue? We heard about the findings, but what is your plans to address that issue? We'll start with Ms. Jennifer. I'm sorry, I started with you last.
Yeah.
Mr. Moore. Okay, because I got to look there. Go ahead. You have
Right.
2 minutes, sir.
Racial disparities come in many forms, and we touch on them in many ways in the county. An area that I am most specifically interested in is in healthcare. We know a lot about the social determinants of health and how that has an impact on health outcomes. And there is less that the county can do about that, which means it's incumbent upon us to be absolutely sure that we manage the medical side of this as well as we can, and that we meet our best practices. The other area of disparities that I'm really interested in, and I mentioned this, is to the extent that disparities show up in terms of policing in East County. We have an opportunity there with the sheriff to really get a better understanding of that. While the sheriff is expanding his role, communities of color are playing a larger and larger part of the East County community. And something I'm really very interested in doing is looking at the contracts that go between the sheriff and the cities where he's agreed to do the policing, and to see what sort of incentives there are. Does the sheriff get to keep money from parking tickets? Does the sheriff get to keep a portion of asset forfeiture, which can be a horribly inequitable arrangement? And way too many policing agencies derive a large part of their budget on the backs of people getting the tickets for jaywalking or whatever. So that's something that I think we can monitor on a continual basis with the data.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Scott?
Yeah, I talked earlier about looking at racial disparities in the criminal justice system, and I think that's so seminal because it hurts communities, it tears apart families. I think that's just, as auditors, we look at causes for problems. We're always trying to identify what's the cause of a problem. And I think the disparities in the criminal justice system are causing a lot of problems in communities and among families. So that's why that's high on my list. The analyst that we talked about a little bit earlier who got fired because of releasing data about disparities in the criminal justice system got fired from an earlier job at the sheriff's office because of preparing a report that showed racial disparities inside the jail in terms of use of force. So that's another area where the auditor, again, not their decision, should have stepped in, and we should step into that going forward. And I'd like to also go back to schools. I've done a lot, as a reporter, I did a lot of work on schools. I've covered every district in Multnomah County. And now as an auditor, I've focused on a couple of education audits, the most recent one being alternative education. And that's the place to correct our equity deficiencies. If we can get kids at an early age up to an equitable level, then we're going to address a lot of problems. I think the county actually has a significant role in that because through Sun Schools it provides wraparound services for kids and for their parents, and that's huge. And then with their mental health clinics and schools, they can really help kids get back up to speed and be able to be engaged in school. So this all works together. I think we can address the equity just as part of our audits. Every single audit, consider what are the equity considerations here and make sure we're addressing those in our audit reports.
Thank you for your comment. Ms. Jennifer?
Thank you. The reason I entered this race was because of my concerns about inequities in our county. Back in the fall of 2016, I decided that I was going to have to run because of the issues that others have mentioned in the sheriff's office that we weren't looking at. And that was what propelled me to be doing this right now. We need to be looking at equity and systemic racism in every audit. There is an equity lens that was developed at the county that's now used around the nation that we can overlay onto our methodology for every audit to make sure we're always asking who's affected by this decision. Is their voice being heard? Who has power here? How can we help get those voices at the table and voices at the table of people who don't have power but are impacted? So it's not enough to say that there's a particular audit we want to do that's going to get at these issues, because we have to be doing it every time. It has to become a part of what auditing is. And that's what I'm going to do if I'm elected. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We have a question.
Yes, my name is Deborah Harris. I'm President D. Harris Leadership Institute, LLC, also a candidate for Multnomah County Chair. My quick question is, as human beings and definitely as in a key position as an auditor, sometimes we tend to close our eyes when we see things that are not ethical. If you worked for me as a county chair and you observed practices that were not ethical, systemic racism, institutional racism, and other things going on, how would you address it? Would you close your eyes? That's a close-ended question. How would you address it?
Thank you for your question. We'll start with Mr. Scott. We'll go to Ms. Jennifer and then to Mr. Marr.
Certainly, thank you for the question. There's a number of tools I think we could use. The broadest one, and what auditors are, I think, incredibly good at, performance auditors are incredibly good at, is diagnosing that there's a systemic problem, and then going in and looking at the causes for that problem, diving in deep, doing a lot of research, talking to a lot of people, and issuing a report that tries to correct and provide solutions for that problem. So that's the long-term answer to that. Absolutely not. I wouldn't close my eyes. The long-term answer would be to have the auditors get involved in really digging in deep on what was happening. Do we have a pattern here? Why is that pattern happening? What can we do about it? What have other communities done about it? Has that been successful? What are we doing so far? Has that been successful? As far as just reporting unethical behavior, I think the county attorney needs to know about that. And the auditor has a hotline, so it's going to come through the hotline, so the auditor can, jump right in and be engaged in that conversation and issue hotline findings and take care of it. That's part of why the hotline is so important to have that be effective so that people who have concerns about their bosses, say, or their coworkers having ethical problems will be able to report it to the hotline. So there's kind of the short-term tools of the hotline and the long-term tools. That's really an auditor sweet spot, I think, of diagnosing the systemic problem and finding solutions to it.
The question was if you recognized it, but thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Jennifer?
Sure. I think I know the incidents that you might be referring to. First of all, the auditor doesn't report to the chair. The auditor reports to the people who elect him or her, just like the chair does. I think we've seen some instances where there have been potentially unethical actions by other elected officials in the county, and in some cases they were handled one way, and in other cases they were handled a different way, which might be closing your eyes. I'm thinking of the comment the chair made to Commissioner Smith in December, and then the earlier investigation of Commissioner Smith that was done through Human Resources. I don't think either of those were handled appropriately. I think if there are concerns about an elected official who reports to the people, we need to have something in our county code that says, here's the process, so they're all handled the same way. And it could be to the State Ethics Commission that the report is made and that they investigate it and issue a finding. The auditor should not weigh in on how the chair should be handling an investigation. That's a management decision, and we tend not to tell people how they should be managing something because then we can't audit it because we were part of that decision. I think there does need to be a very clear process so that it doesn't look like a double standard depending on who's the one being called into question. So I hope that answers your question.
That's good. It's from your personal observation, something you observed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Mark?
The question gets at some uncharted territory, really, for the board and the auditor. The auditor has to maintain his or her independence above everything. Without independence, we begin to lose our ability to have an impact. That said, I've been involved in situations where the auditor's office, while it doesn't do an investigation, will manage a contract for an outside or independent investigator. In order to do that, as auditor, I would want to get, don't know about consent, or at least some recognition of the delicacy of the situation from everyone involved, and look as not sort of an arbitration sort of thing, but to agree that this is a way to handle it without the auditor suffering any independence issues. So that private investigation, it could either be with an HR investigator, because we don't have those sorts of skills in the auditor's office, or some other general management inquiry. But I do agree with Jennifer that it's a blind spot in the county charter and the code, so we need that to be straightened out.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. We have a question.
Yes. Hi, I'm Dr. Audrey Terrell.
Please
I am
limit
president.
your, I'm sorry,
and CEO
excuse me. Please limit your questions to 1 minute so the candidates have a proper time to
Yes, sir.
respond.
I will
Thank
try
you.
my best.
Okay.
I'm Dr. Audrey Terrell. I'm the president and CEO of the Dr. Audrey Terrell Institute, where I work with the underserved students in high schools. I have a concern, and thank you, Ms. Harris, for that, bringing that up. That was one of them. But thank you, and you responded. Thank you. I just want to say that I have programs that I work with these underserved, and I'm finding out because I hear that some of the programs that are being served through the county, it's a set of people that's getting it over and over and over. And those of us who are trying to seek some type of support, this is my 3rd year, we're not getting it, but you continually go to the same people. Now, I serve underserved youth, multicultural youth, very intelligent, very bright, but they need assistance, and I see the exposure opportunities. I am doing that. You as auditors, tell me, how will you audit those people that's been getting the services over and over and over again, and recognize those who are trying to be able to make a difference in the lives of the youth in this county?
appreciate your question. We'll start with Mr. Mark, go to Mr. Scott, then to Ms. Jennifer. You have 2 minutes to respond, sir.
That is a terrific question. In just about any program, it's important and incumbent upon the auditor to investigate how it is, what decisions are made into how the resources of the program are distributed. And much more often than not, they're very limited resources. And so the extent to which that someone might be getting more attention or more assistance from the program than the others starts to actually cause more problems than we had in the first place. It's definitely true that I will always be looking for equity in terms of the distribution of services. We've had some instances, particularly with rent assistance and utility assistance payments, where how the county goes about deciding, in this case actually, it's how our contractors go about deciding who gets that assistance, is different from one part of the county to the next. In some cases, it's the first person to call. You know, we're opening up the line, you know, on this date at this time, and it's the first. Others have a lottery. Others have waiting lists, and they work with that. But it's in each case, it's the equity issue about how resources are distributed is important.
Mr. Scott.
So I've only worked in government for 5 years as a county auditor. State auditor. My previous 25 years have been outside government. What I've realized extremely quickly is that one of the things that government does not do well is manage contracts for performance. And I think that's across the board. The county has its own issue with that, and that's a problem because a third or more of the county's business is done through contractors. So that school audit that I was talking about earlier, part of the reason I'm interested in that is because I really want to zero in and give some ground level examples of how the county is managing contracts and whether they're getting the best performance they could get out of contractors who are doing incredibly important work. I mean, in my mind, some of the most important work we have going on because they're trying to support kids who really need support and they're trying to support families who really need support. So I think we need to take a hard look at how are the counties managing the performance of those contracts? What are they doing to support those contractors and make sure they're doing the right thing? Are they, diversifying the offerings and making sure that there's good competition, which is, core to improving performance? So that goes right to the heart of something I'm interested in looking at, and I appreciate the question.
Ms. Jennifer, thank you for your comment. Ms. Jennifer.
Thank you. I appreciated that question. Before I became a county auditor, I was a grant writer and grant manager, mostly in higher education. But I saw what it was like to be applying for grants or contracts. And there are certainly some organizations that get in early and have a much easier time getting those awards over and over again, to where it creates kind of an expectation that they'll continue to get that funding. And it's harder for other smaller organizations that have less capacity to get that support. And I think one of the things the county has talked about is trying to make their portal for people who want to do business with the county easier to access, more equitable, making sure they're reaching out to minority, women-owned, small entrepreneurs. So I think that is something we could definitely audit to see what changes they have made. We have a new management system, enterprise resource system, that's coming out probably in a year. I say probably because we don't know now. And that's supposed to change what it's like to bid for contracts, have them reviewed, and so forth. I think it'd be a perfect time to look at how that system is working, and are we able to help really small businesses grow and build that capacity so that we can have a rich offering for all in our county.
Thank you for your
Thank
comment.
you.
Thank you for your question. We have another question. We'll go from Mr. Mark, Ms. Jennifer, and then to Mr. Scott.
And I will stay on time.
Okay, thank you.
My question has to do with the former county auditor, now city auditor, that demonstrated tremendous courage in having the city's auditing department pull away from being underneath the city. She had to go to the the fox to ask if she could audit the hen house, and she said that's not appropriate. I can't have permission if I'm going to do effective auditing. And so she met a block road with those elected officials. Then she went out to the community and garnered support, and then brought in the auditor from Texas and a couple other key support, demonstrated a great deal of courage. So my question to you all is, we have a county chair that called another elected official the B word, and no one said anything. Should there be a role for a county auditor to go public and say, this is not the civility that we expect? And my question is, if you met a roadblock, what method or process would you send a clear message that no other elected commissioner controls you, and that you're going to do what your values espouses?
Okay, thank you for your question. Mr. Mark.
That question gets at the core of independence, the most important feature of the auditor's office. The auditor's office at Multnomah County has a structural independence that comes from the auditor being elected as opposed to appointed. We're all here as testament to this independent structure. The other thing about audits, though, that they can't make anybody do anything. So you have to be incredibly persuasive. I think in the case you're talking about with the city, that was a case of an auditor going to the public. My feeling about the reaching out to the public that way is that is an incredibly important avenue. It's a tool to use. You don't want to have to get into that. And so in order to do what I can before reaching that level, I have to develop a relationship with the entire board. Unlike the city, the board of county commissioners that are not the chair, that from the 4 districts, are more like legislators than they are like managers. It may not seem like it at times, but they have very different views about how things should work. They have very different interests. And it would be incumbent upon me to do the sort of work that they value. And in that way, they would support me.
Thank you for your comment. Ms. Jennifer, 2 minutes.
Yes, I appreciate the question. That ballot measure, the initiative that Mary Hall Caballero led, was very exciting for me. I actually volunteered in the early stages to research different budget models so that they would have a variety of different options that they could present and say, here's what other communities are doing to help us maintain our independence. And I also submitted written testimony about why the city council should support that going forward, should support the ballot measure and letting the people decide. Because we have a slightly different budget structure, we haven't had to go that route yet. If it seemed like we needed to, if we were being a bit more assertive and firmer with the elected officials, and it seemed like we needed to make sure we had that budgetary independence, I would certainly want to perform the due diligence that happened at the City of Portland Auditor's Office and before pursuing it, but would not be opposed to pursuing that. I think it's also really important for us to be very clear about our integrity, what we stand for. I think we should be taking things out to the public on a regular basis. I want to have a couple of town halls each year so that people learn about what we're doing, because most people who I talk to don't know this office exists, don't know it's supposed to serve them. How can they hold us accountable if they don't know we are even here? So I want to be out there more so that if there is something questionable that's happening, I can have people who have been learning about the office and understanding what we're doing standing with me. We can stand together to say that's not okay.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Scott, you have 2 minutes, sir.
Yes, I think if the office does, if I'm elected, the office does step up its intense audits of services that matter most, that's going to be more controversial. It's going to upset people. It's going to upset people on one side of the aisle or the other. Both as a reporter and now as an auditor, I've had a lot of experience dealing with people who are upset by the fact that maybe something makes them look bad. And I'm used to working with people on that. I'm used to convincing them that these are stone cold facts and not opinions and not bias on the part of the auditor. So I'm not anticipating that we're going to run into a problem on that, but I wouldn't hesitate to go to the voters for an independent budget structure if there were a problem. I think it's not. Auditors are very objective. That's our stock and trade. It's not wise of a political figure, at the top of the county, to oppose what the auditors are doing or try to thwart it. It's not very good politics. So I'm not expecting that is going to happen, but I certainly would want to take measures if it did, and one of those would be going to the voters. I also, just in all honesty, want to address what you said about the B word. As an auditor, we're good at long-term symptomatic things. Okay, I don't know how helpful it is for me as an auditor to say that was a horrible thing that she said. I'm going to get out in front of that and be in the media and be quoted and all that sort of stuff. I want to deliberate on that, and I think what we're good at is thinking, what is this a symptom of? What's going on? What's happening at the county that's making someone feel that they can do this, and try to address it that way in sort of our long-term, in-depth, intense, objective auditor way.
Thank you for your comments. We have 5 minutes left. Okay, we have 5 minutes left. Did I miss you, Mr.?
No, I answered.
Okay, thank you. We have 5 minutes left, and I'd like to give each one of you 1 minute to talk about your platform and to address the audience and our viewing audience. We'll start with Ms. Jennifer,
Okay.
Mr. Scott, and then Mr. Marsh. 1 minute.
I want to thank everyone who's watching and who's here in the audience for taking time to learn about each of our campaigns. I really hope that my commitment to auditing, to independence, and to serving the public and being an auditor for the public came through. I hope that you'll choose to vote for me this May. If you do, you'll be joining the main union at the county, which is AFSCME Local 88, which has endorsed me, as has AFSCME Council 75, the Columbia Pacific Building Trades Council, and the Northwest Oregon Labor Council, as well as a number of auditing professionals and people who serve the public throughout the county. I really appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Scott.
So I hope this whole discussion, I know auditing is not top of mind for people, but I hope it's helped you to realize the power of performance audits to really make a difference. That's why I got into this race, and I believe it to my heart that it can make a huge difference in services that matter. So that's why it's sort of a moral obligation of us to focus on those services that matter most, not to do audits that are kind of small ball. And that's what I want to bring to the audit office. I also promise you I'll bring independence. I haven't been in government my whole career. I promise you I will be impatient with government. I promise you I'll be impatient with the can just getting kicked down the road. And I promise you I will have high expectations of government. That's what I'll bring, and I would appreciate your vote.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Marsh, 1 minute, sir.
Thank you very much for having us here.
My pleasure.
We really appreciate the attention. It has risen the profile of the auditor's office immensely. I strongly believe that government can and should play a role in helping people that need it. And by helping the government get the most value out of every dollar it spends, an auditor is not only helping the county in its mission, the auditor is helping to bring confidence to government. I have the support of policymakers like State Representatives Mitch Greenlick and Carla Peluso, the current auditors at Multnomah County and Washington County, Steve March and John Hutzler, as well as nationally known performance audit professionals like Drummond Kahn. Experience makes a difference in this job, and I have it. Former Multnomah County and City of Portland auditor Levon Griffin-Valade said, "No one is more prepared to lead the Multnomah County Auditor's Office than Mark Ulanowitz." I appreciate your attention, and I would really appreciate your vote.
We thank you for your comments. To all the candidates, we wish you the best. We thank you for honoring our invitation, honoring the people's questions, and best of luck to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Give them a hand.